Podcasting from the heart of the Gator Nation in Alachua County, Florida, this is Extension Cord, the podcast of IFAS Extension Alachua County, where we plug in and bring IFAS Extension to life. Good afternoon, this is Taylor Clem with IFAS Extension Alachua County, and thank you for joining us back on this part 2 of our series as we discuss the different programs that are happening here with IFAS Extension Alachua County. In the previous episode, we spoke with the County Extension Director and Livestock Agent, Dr. Cindy Sanders, as well as our 4-H group and our FCS agent. But on this episode, we're going to continue on the discussion, but we're going to speak with both Dr. Kevin Korus and Dr. Tatiana Sanchez to see what kind of programs they are offering here in Alachua County. So let's go ahead and kick this off. Our first guest today is Dr. Kevin Korus. He has a doctorate in plant health, and he is our community agriculture and natural resources agent. So Kevin, welcome, and thank you for joining us on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Taylor.
So you have been with the Extension Office in Alachua County for how long now?
A little over 3 years, approaching 3.5.
3.5 years. That's wonderful. And I know that you do a lot with Alachua County, a lot of our producers. Tell me, what is your technical title for your program?
Yeah, so I am the Agriculture and Natural Resources Extension Agent for Alachua County, but more specifically, I work with the agricultural row crops, which includes corn, peanut, soybean, and we even have a few acres of tobacco planted in Alachua County. So I work with those commodities. I also do some work consulting with cattle producers and horse owners, and I consult with their forage operations and make sure that they have good, healthy forage. And then natural resources, education, and then the third kind of component of what I do is pesticide safety education.
So what kind of stuff is it that you do with, so you're working with the corn growers, the peanuts, and I always love to hear the fact that we have tobacco in Alachua County because that always raises people's eyebrows. But what are some of the common things that you deal with when you're working with those different producers in row crops?
Yeah, so a lot of what we do at IFAS is try to help our growers practice what we call best management practices, BMPs, and that involves a lot of things, but mostly we try to help them with their irrigation scheduling so that they are reducing the amount of water that they're using. We help them with incorporating technologies into their operations. Some of those things are like soil moisture sensors, so they can understand exactly how much water is in their soil and available to the crops. I also do the same thing with nutrient management. I look at a lot of soils reports and evaluate crop need based on what is available in the soil, and then try to get a good fertilizer mix for our growers so that they're not over-fertilizing or under-fertilizing. I also have a strong background in plant health diagnostics, so I do a lot of scouting for diseases and insects. I try to get out there and help the growers keep an eye out for things that could turn into potential problems throughout the year so that they can get on top of it early. The best way to mitigate a disease or a pest problem is by diagnosing it properly and in a time-appropriate manner. So a lot of consulting, a lot of field scouting is what I do. And then, during the off season, I try to put out publications just to help put some educational information out there on the same types of things that I consult about.
What kind of things have you noticed? Because I know diagnostics is incredibly important for our producers because, properly diagnosing any type of crop, if there's an issue with it, that can make or break a grower economically if to make sure that they are producing a yield that makes sense for them. What are some of the things that you've noticed with those diagnostics of our row crops that have popped up to be a concern that you've helped mitigate and manage with those best management practices?
Yeah, so a lot of our corn growers are peanut growers as well. And in order to grow peanuts effectively here in the Southeast, in Florida, you basically have to put the peanuts on a prescription spray program with fungicides. Otherwise, they'll just get eaten up by foliar plant fungi. So starting at about 100 or so days after planting, well, more like 60 days after planting, a lot of our growers will just start our peanuts on a bi-weekly or every 2-week fungicide program where they're out there spraying. And they absolutely have to do that in order to maintain a yield. And they sometimes carry that mindset into their corn production. And with corn, it's not as necessary to have a prescription spray program. It's more of, well, we need to go out there and scout. We need to find out what diseases they have in their field, what the weather conditions are, what the growth and development of the corn is. And then based on all of those factors, we'll recommend either to apply or not to apply a fungicide. So southern corn leaf blight is a big one here in the South. And so that's mostly what I see on corn. But again, it's me consulting with those growers and helping them understand when it's necessary to apply and when it's actually necessary to say, you know what, I have some disease in my field, but it's not going to be worth me paying for a fungicide application at this point. I'm not going to see a yield dip. So I end up saving that grower, a bunch of money from the application itself. And we also reduce our pesticide exposure when they don't have to spray as often. So I was expecting to see some kind of new and really voracious disease here in the South because we have such good weather conditions for disease development. But what I've noticed is that, our corn in the 3.5 years that I've been down here is really only affected by southern corn leaf blight and sometimes southern rust, and it doesn't always need a fungicide application.
I mean, that's important to know because if we're talking about like where does our food come from and food systems, there's always a lot of concern with those consumers on how food crops are being treated, and knowing that we have a resource such as you working with those growers, that's really nice because you're letting them know that you should spray or you should not spray because obviously they want to produce that yield, but you don't want to do it unnecessarily for the protection of the crop and the individual that's applying it, because it can be, I assume, costly to apply pesticides to a row crop.
Yeah, indeed. It's on a scale of about $12 to about $35 an acre, depending on which product needs to go out and how it's applied. But again, $12 to $30 some an acre. If you're managing a couple thousand acres of corn, it's good to not have to go out there and apply that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I want to switch topics momentarily and talk a little bit about the natural resources side. So, you mentioned with the farmers and agriculture doing like soil tests or soil water moisture sensors to kind of determine the proper ways for irrigating, so we're always concerned about water resources and how we're doing agriculture applications. But with regards to the natural resources and water, what kind of those programs do you do?
Yeah, so, I basically kind of had to do a needs assessment when I got to Florida and see what the needs were with water and natural resources here in the county. And what I've noticed is that most of the calls and inquiries that I get are on pond health. So I often do site visits and conduct water quality testing. It's usually after somebody notices a fish kill, or they see an excess of algae blooming in their ponds, or they have some kind of aquatic weed that they can't control. So I go out there with a little portable water test kit, and I try to help educate them on, again, best management practices for them to be able to maintain their pond's healthy water quality. And so, I do a lot of consulting with water from more of a kind of a recreational pond standpoint.
Yeah. That's important because I know that you do pond workshops, or you have done them in the past. Is that correct?
Yeah, we have a lot of inquiries on pond construction, fish stocking, what types of fish work well here in Florida, what types of fish go good together in a pond and kind of live happily ever after, if you will. So we focus on that. Then we also just focus again on water quality. That's a big one. Biological oxygen demand is important to maintain healthy fish populations, and biological oxygen availability fluctuates again drastically throughout the day. And there are certain things that pond owners can do to help mitigate the loss of oxygen in a pond. So we cover that, and then finally we cover aquatic weed control. Because again, we have a lot of different kinds of weeds here in Florida, a lot of aquatic weeds, and a lot of introduced invasive species, which I said the word invasive species, which is another big part of what I do. I serve on the Invasive Species Council for the University of Florida, and I do a lot of consulting about invasive species control, management, and removal. Any plant person in Florida knows that we deal with a host of different types of invasive plants that can take over and crowd out our native plants. So we deal with them from the aquatic standpoint and the terrestrial standpoint.
And one last point that I'd like you to briefly talk about is, I know that you do some youth programming as well, and you teach a 4-H wilderness survival camp. Is that correct?
That's true, yeah. So each extension agent has a youth component, whether we're a 4-H agent or not. So, yeah, every summer I put on a 2-day wilderness survival camp for youth, and we cover the basics. Also, I teach them how to start fires without the use of matches or a lighter. So it's fun. I get to tap into my old Boy Scout ways.
Boy Scout.
Yes, yes, sir. And so I really enjoy putting on that programming and try to add a little something new each year. I'm also the co-coach for our 4-H forest ecology team. And basically the 4-H forest ecology team competes every year at a contest where they're required to identify a list of trees and a list of other plants. So between those two programs, I'm able to meet my 5% youth component. And it's all kind of falls within that natural resources area.
And I do like to mention that because of your wilderness survival projects or program that you've done and blogging on wilderness survival, you have ended up being a consultant. Is that correct? For a couple episodes of Naked and Afraid?
It was just one episode. Yeah, one episode that was filmed at what they call the Seminole Swamp in kind of central Florida. I had wrote a blog discussing my summer camp and my wilderness survival camp, and one of the producers was looking online for an expert in Florida who knew about plants, who also was familiar with wilderness survival techniques. And after Googling that, I guess my blog popped up, and he called me, and I thought that would be an excellent thing to put on my resume. So I was there, and I helped the cast members learn a little bit about what to expect in the Florida wilderness, and it was a really great opportunity.
That's awesome.
I think, the viewership on the average viewership for a Naked and Afraid episode is, I think, 1.5 million or something like that. So it was a great reach.
Yeah, understandable. Well, Kevin, that's awesome. I know that you do a lot of excellent things for Alachua County, and I know there's a lot more that you're going to be up to in the coming year. So I want to thank you for coming and joining us today on the podcast. And if anybody's interested, they can reach out to our county extension office to get a hold of Kevin.
That's correct. I appreciate you having me, Taylor. The last thing I'd like to mention is that I also do pesticide safety education. So for our ag producers who need agricultural row crop or private applicator continuing education units, or if they are looking to take those exams to become licensed to apply restricted use pesticides, I also do that education as well.
Oh, I'm so glad you brought that up. That's important because I know that our office, one of your regular programs is doing the CEU trainings. So it's a good way for anybody that needs a CEUs or they need to get that training, they can reach out to Kevin regarding that. Thank you. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Taylor.
All right. Take it easy, and I will see you soon.
All right, thanks for having me on the extension cord.
You're welcome. Thank you for joining us.
You bet. All right.
Next we have on the podcast is Dr. Tatiana Sanchez, and she has a Doctorate of Plant Medicine from the University of Florida, and she is the county's Commercial Horticulture Agent. Tatiana, welcome.
Hi, Taylor. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Before we get started, I want to hear a little bit about how long have you been with IFAS Extension, and what are the types of programs that you are doing?
So I started in Alachua County in the Extension Office in May 2016. So it's been a little over 3 years now. And my program is divided into like three main sub-programs. The biggest one being crop production of horticultural crops in Alachua County. The second one is a little bit more targeted towards the green industry, which will make all the landscapers, nurseries, and all the people, professionals that work in the green industry. And then my last program is based on entrepreneurship in agriculture and alternative enterprises. So everybody that wants to start a farm or learn about horticulture and extension, and that also includes youth. So those are like a big summary of my main three programs for commercial hort in Alachua County.
So I want to ask a little bit about each of those programs. So you talk about commercial production. What kind of crops or ornamental plants do you commonly work with?
In Alachua in particular, we have a lot of watermelon production. So I work closely with watermelon growers throughout the season to help them. But we also have wide variety of diversified farms that grow all sorts of crops, from vegetables to blueberries, and they're practicing best management practices such as cover cropping, rotation, use of soil moisture sensors. So I work with all of them. Not only to do the pest management and disease and pest identification, but they also come to extension to learn about better ways to manage their nutrients and to make a better use of their water resources as well.
You know, do you work with any of those, the community-supported agriculture growers, the CSAs?
I work with a few of the farms locally that have CSAs as part of their distribution, like direct market alternatives. With this COVID-19 outbreak, what is interesting is for those farms that have a CSA, they're better, that they're in a better position to sell their product because they already have that in their business set up. Mm-hmm. To be able to partition their product in shares and push it out to the consumer. Whereas other growers that don't have a CSA system or don't have an online base or an online presence to be able to move their product, they're having a harder time in selling what they have.
For some of the producers, what is the most limiting factor that they have to deal with when growing food?
We live in Florida with sandy soil, so our quality of our soils is not the greatest. So we have to add a lot of fertilizer and make sure that we irrigate the crop. So it depends on the situation, what is going to be the most limiting factor.
And that's why you do a lot of work with them, is because if we look at these limiting factors, I mean, you mentioned fertilizer and water. Some of our biggest concerns are water quality and water quantity. So you're working with a lot of them so they can know what's the most appropriate way to manage this landscape given these set conditions and what I'm growing to make sure that they're using their resources properly. So I know that that's incredibly important because you're looking at it's almost like an economics and environmental continuum is how do you make sure that the farmer is growing something that's economical, but at the same time, they're being environmentally friendly by following our best management practices. That's tough because I imagine every case is different.
It is. And growers really are in tune with what's going on in their crops, and even though they might not know specifics on varieties and some of the best management practices, they're always trying to do what's best for their crops. So they're open to adopt best management practices, which is great. But sometimes the technology that comes with these best management practices is where we have to take a little bit more time to enable them to become familiar with the technologies, make sure that it works for their scenario, and then adopt them. Mm-hmm. Not all the technologies or not all of the best management practices might be the best fit for individual growers. You have to find out what is more practical, what can be easily adopted, and what is going to have the most impact in their operation.
Great. And I like to talk about water, kind of use it as a segue. And part of your program as well is you work a lot with those professional landscape companies, commercial landscapers. Can you tell me a little bit more detail about that program?
So for the landscapers, one of the strategies that we have to get them to be more conscious of water resources, their importance in how to take care of them, is through the Green Industries Best Management Practices program, which is powered by the Florida Friendly Landscaping Program. And basically, during these classes, we teach different modules that train the green industry professionals into how to fertilize, how to calculate the correct fertilizer application. We give them updates on the local ordinance that they have to follow to make sure that they know what are the bans, if there's any fertilizer ban. Maybe make them familiar with the irrigation code. There is also a module on irrigation, so they learn, even though they might not be the ones that are setting up the irrigation systems, they are not completely alien to what is an irrigation system, what are the parts, how to check for leaks and things like that. We also have a module on pesticide management, so they know what is the importance of using things like personal protective equipment, protecting non-targeted areas, and how to protect themselves as well. Because we want people that is exposed to any pesticides, such as herbicides that they use frequently on this work on their jobs, how they need to handle it, and what are the steps they need to take to protect others as well. So by doing good practices on how to use pesticides and how to manage things like fertilizers, some of the nutrients in the fertilizers can be pollutants. So by tackling all these different concepts, our goal is that they will become better stewards of their job practices to reduce the effect or the impact that these have on water resources. So the ultimate goal, everything connects to water. How do you, what can you do to reduce your impact or the impact of your activities into our water resources? So less pesticide use, less for, not necessarily less, but better, more accurate way of using pesticides and fertilizers.
So that's great information. You know, you're working with them year round. How do you track the successes or the impacts of those trainings with those professionals?
That's the $1 million question. It's very hard. It's very hard. There's multiple ways of doing it. One is in collaboration with other entities that are taking measurements on the number of nitrates and number of amount of phosphorus that is in specific places within the county. We allocate an amount of pounds of phosphorus or amount of pounds of nitrogen reduction to education credit. So the classes from the Florida Friendly Landscaping program overall, they are given a score based on any reductions that may be observed in these different places. So that is one way to calculate, based on the education that the people received, we can infer that this much reduction could be the result, direct result from those activities. That is one way of doing it. The other way is without these people getting this education and therefore having access to their certification and continued education units that enables them to renew their licenses, they couldn't be able to offer their services. So that is a social economic impact that we have by offering these programs. They are able to have a business, and having that business comply with all the requirements from the law. And not only that, but they are up to date in any of the new ordinances or codes that are given by the county as an effort to be better stewards for the environment. So those are kind of the impacts that we're going after.
Wonderful. Well, Tatiana, thank you very much for joining us on the podcast. Do you have any other things that you would like to say about your program before we end our time together?
Yes, I just want to make a little announcement for my last program or sub-program out of my whole all of my responsibilities. And my last program is on agricultural entrepreneurship and alternative enterprises. That includes beekeeping. We have a national winning series on beekeeping that's very popular. So if you're tuned in this podcast, check us out on the web. And also in a collaboration with the Small Business Development Center and Farm Credit, IFAS Extension, we are putting together a series for beginner farmers on agricultural entrepreneurship. So yeah, check that too.
Oh, wonderful.
That's all I have to offer. I just tell you everything I did throughout the year.
Well, thank you very much, Tatiana. I know that
You're
we'll
welcome.
hear more from you later on because we'll invite you back and we can talk more about your specific programs, like your beekeeping program. So thank you very much for joining us, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Well, that concludes the second part in this series as we discuss all the different programs that are offered here in Alachua County from our different agents. I think it's important that if you have any questions or if you need some support or help in anything that falls underneath the responsibilities of agents, feel free to reach out to us. We'll help either connect you to those resources or help solve those problems and get those solutions out to you. But in the meantime, always like and subscribe our podcast page, and we look forward to doing more of this, and we will see you in the future. Thank you.